Weaver finally identified as a grill over the control panels. He took a step that way, then changed his mind and turned back towards the airlock. Just as he reached the nearer airlock door, the farther one swung open and an instant torrent of wind thrust him outward. Strangling, Weaver grabbed desperately at the doorframe as it went by. He swung with a sickening thud into the inner wall, but he hung on and pulled himself back inside. The force of the wind was dropping rapidly, so was the air pressure. Ragged black blotches swam before Weaver's eyes. He fumbled with his helmet, trying to swing it back over his head, but it stubbornly remained where it was. The blow when he struck the airlock wall, he thought dimly, it must have bent the helmet so that it would not fit into its grooves. He forced himself across the room toward the faint gleam of the Aurigan control board, shaped like a double horseshoe it was, around the two lattice-topped stools and bristling with levers, knobs, and sliding panels. One of these, he knew, controlled the airlock. He slapped blindly at them, pulling, pushing, turning as many as he could reach. Then the floor reeled under him, and as he fell toward it, changed into a soft, gray, endless mist. When he awoke, the airlock door was closed. His lungs were gratefully full of air. The Aurigan was nowhere to be seen. The door behind which he had disappeared was still closed. Weaver got up, stripped off his spacesuit, and by hammering with the sole of one of his boots managed to straighten out the dent in the back of the helmet. He put the suit back on, then looked doubtfully at the control board. It wouldn't do to go on pulling things at random. He might cause some damage. Tentatively he pushed a slide he remembered touching before. When nothing happened, he pushed it back. He tried a knob, then a lever. The inner door of the airlock swung open. Weaver marched into it, took one look through the viewport set in the outer door, and scrambled back out. He closed the airlock again and thought a minute. In the center of each horseshoe curve of the control board was a gray translucent disk with 6 buttons under it. They might, Weaver thought, be television screens. He pressed the first button under one of them and the screen lighted up. He pressed the second button, then all the others in turn. They all showed him the same thing, the view he had seen from the viewport in the airlock. Stars, and nothing but stars. The moon, incredibly, had disappeared. He was in space. His first thought, when he was able to think correctly again, was to find the Aurigan and make him put things right. He tried all the remaining knobs and levers and buttons on the control board, reckless of consequences, until the door slid open again. Then he went down the corridor and found the Aurigan. The creature was lying on the floor with a turnip-shaped thing over its head, tubes trailing from it to an opened cabinet in the wall. It was dead, dead and decaying. He searched the ship. He found storerooms, with cylinders and bales of stuff that looked as if it might possibly be food. He found the engine room with great piles of outlandishly sculptured metal and winking lights and swinging meter needles. But he was the only living thing on board. The view from all 6 directions in the control room telescreens and in the ship's direct viewports alike was exactly the same. The stars, like dandruff on Weaver's blue serge suit. No one of them apparently any nearer than the others. No way to tell which, if any of them, was his own. The smell of the dead creature was all through the ship. Weaver closed his helmet against it, then remembered that the air in his suit tank would not last forever. He lugged the corpse out to the airlock, closed the inner door on it, and opened the outer one. It was hard for him to accept the obvious explanation of the Aurigan's death, but he finally came to it. He recalled something the guide had said about the Aurigan's susceptibility to earthly infections. That must have been it. That had been why the creature had bellowed and run to seal itself off from him. It was all his fault. If he had not sneezed with his helmet open, the Aurigan would not be dead. He would not be marooned in space, and the other Aurigans down on Earth would not be marooned there. Though they, he decided wistfully, would probably get home sooner or later. They knew where home was. As far as he could, he made himself master of the ship and its contents. He discovered by arduous trial and error which of the supposed foods in the storeroom he could eat safely, which would make him sick, and which were not foods at all. He found out which of the control board's knobs and levers controlled the engines, and he shut them off. He studied the universe around him, hoping to see some change. After nearly a month it happened. One star grew from a brilliant pinpoint to a tiny disk, and each time he awoke it was larger. Weaver took counsel with himself and pasted a small piece of transparent red tape over the place on the telescreen where the star appeared. He scratched a mark to show where the star was on each of 3 succeeding days. The trail crawled diagonally down toward the bottom of the screen. He knew nothing about astrogation, but he knew that if he were heading toward a star, it ought to stay in the same place on his screen. He turned on the engines and swung the steering arm downward. The star crawled back toward the center of the screen, then went past. Weaver painstakingly brought it back, and so in parsec-long zigzags he held his course. The star was now increasing alarmingly in brightness. It occurred to Weaver that he must be traveling with some enormous speed, although he had no sensation of movement at all. There was a position on the scale around the steering arm that he thought would put the engines into reverse. He tried it, and now he scratched the apparent size of the star into the red tape. First it grew by leaps and bounds, then more slowly, then hardly at all. Weaver shut off the engines again and waited. The star had planets. He noted their passage in the telescreen, marked their apparent courses, and blithely set himself to land on the one that seemed to be nearest. He was totally ignorant of orbits. He simply centered his planet on the screen as he had done with the star, found that it was receding from him, and began to run it down. He came in too fast the first time, tore through the atmosphere like a lost soul, and frantically out again, sweating in the control room's sudden heat. He turned out in space and carefully adjusted his speed so that ship and planet drifted softly together. Gently, as if he had been doing this all his life, Weaver took the ship down upon a continent of rolling greens and browns, landed it without a jar, saw the landscape begin to tilt as he stepped into the airlock, and barely got outside before the ship rolled 10,000 feet down a gorge he had not noticed and smashed itself into a powdering of fragments. 2 days later, he began turning into a god. Section 2. They had put him into a kind of enclosed seat at the end of a long rotating arm, counterweighted at the opposite side of the aircar proper, and the whole affair swung gently in an eccentric path around and up and down as the aircar moved very slowly forward through the village. All the houses were faced with broad wooden balconies, stained blood red and turquoise, umber and yellow, gold and pale green. And all of these were crowded to bursting with the blue and white horny chests and the big-eyed faces of the bug things. Weaver swung in his revolving seat past first one level and another, and the twittering voices burst around him like the stars of a 4th of July rocket. This was the 5th village they had visited since the bug things had found him wandering in the mountains. At the first one he had been probed, examined, and twittered over interminably. Then the aircar had arrived. They had strapped him into this ridiculous seat and begun what looked very much like a triumphal tour. Other aircars without the revolving arm preceded and followed him. The slowly following cars and their riders were gay with varicolored streamers. Every now and then one of the bug things in the cars would raise a pistol-like object to fire a pinkish streak that spread out high in the air and became a gently descending, diffusing cloud of rosy dust. And always the twittering rose and fell as Weaver revolved at the end of the swinging arm. One had to remember, he reminded himself, that earthly parallels did not necessarily apply. It was undignified, certainly, to be revolving like a child on a merry-go-round while these crowds glared with bright alien eyes. But the important thing was that they had not once offered him any violence. They had not even put him into the absurd revolving seat by force. They had led him to it gently, with a great deal of gesturing and twittering explanation, and if their faces were almost nauseatingly unpleasant with the constantly moving complexity of parts that he had seen in live lobsters, well, that proved nothing except that they were not human. Later, perhaps, he could persuade them to wear masks. It was a holiday, a great occasion. Everything testified to that. The colored streamers, the clouds of rosy dust like sky rockets, the crowds of people lined up to await him. And why not? Clearly they had never before seen a man. He was unique, a personage to be honored, a visitor descended from the heavens, clothed in fire and glory like the Spaniards among the Aztecs, he thought. Weaver began to feel gratified, his ego expanding. Experimentally he waved to the massed ranks of bug things as he passed them. A new explosion of twittering broke out, and a forest of twig-like arms waved back at him. They seemed to regard him with happy awe. "Thank you," said Weaver graciously. "Thank you." In the morning there were crowds massed outside the building where he had slept, but they did not put him into the air car with the revolving arm again. Instead, four new ones came into his room after he had eaten the strange red and orange fruits that were all of the bug